All right, so we are live. I'm going to go ahead and find my outline. Here we go, while we wait for people to join. I just did a members live, but it was very short. Sorry about that. My husband needed in the room because he is mowing here right now. Hey, Ashley. All right, let me check the audio really quickly. Hey, Sarah. Whoa, that is really low. All right, we're going to turn this up a bit. Hopefully you can hear me better now. Glad I checked that. There's nothing more annoying than bad audio, and I know this is not great audio because I don't have a microphone, but I've tried listening to sermons before, and it's so quiet. I put my earbud in, but even then when I have my earbuds in, it's so quiet, and it's super annoying. So hopefully that is good. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this subject because in the world that we live in, it's no secret that everyone gets offended by everything. And that's very easy to see. You know, as parents, we ourselves have to find the balance between being unoffendable, but also not offending others. However, conflict will come. Conflict is going to be in our home. Conflict is going to be in our church. Conflict is going to be in our workplace. There's going to be conflict wherever we go. We're all human beings and we all have different personalities, and sometimes those personalities clash. So they will happen, and how do we teach our kids to have thick skin while also being careful not to completely bulldoze them in life as well? Because we can do that as parents. Can I talk candidly for just a minute about why so many are leaving the IFB, especially the new generation that's coming up? I do think that a lot of that has to do with doctrine being poorly taught. But I also think that the previous generation went overboard in the treatment of their kids and their teens as they were raising them. They were way too harsh, and there was no grace shown at all to their children. They had a tendency to turn every argument or disagreement into a full-blown attack of the character of that person, and that's a shame. And I didn't want to do that with my kids. I wanted to do differently when it came to raising my own kids. I wanted to have a relationship with them that would last for the rest of our lives. And I wanted to get to the heart and the spirit of the matter versus just bulldozing over every emotion that they might have and just expecting blind obedience without any thought for their emotions or anything that they were feeling. Also, with being in the ministry, I've had to learn how to get along with others when we have disagreements, not to take everything as a personal attack, and how to smooth conflicts over, how to put out fires as they speak. So how can we handle criticism while also learning how to deal with disagreements with others, and how can we show our kids how to do the same? So number one, obviously, this is going to be the most obvious one, is model the behavior that you want your kids to see. And one of the ways that we do this with others is by being forgiving and letting hurts go. Now, I just talked about this on the Members Live. I saw a really good reel the other day. I think Jen Bay had shared it on her Instagram story. And it was basically someone who deals with talking about relationships and different things like that. He was talking about how forgiveness doesn't mean that you're just letting that person have free reign over your life again. It doesn't mean that you even have to put that person back into the place of trust that they were in before. Forgiveness is something that we do for ourselves is so that we have peace, because forgiveness helps us more than anyone. But it doesn't mean that if you tell someone, I forgive you, then you're allowing that person who has hurt you so much in the past to just have, be back to that place of trust and innocence that they were at one time. So, but one way we can model it to our kids is that they see that even when we have been hurt in life, that we are able to forgive and move on. When you forgive, you are choosing to acknowledge that, yes, there was hurt that was done. However, I'm not going to let that hurt control my thoughts. I'm not going to let that hurt control my life. I'm choosing to move on from this hurt that has been done. And that's not to say that there's not going to be scars from that hurt or scar tissue, from that hurt. But forgiveness and moving on helps us have peace It's not necessarily for the other person, even. It's for us more than anyone. Learn how to address behavior without turning it into a dumpster fire. And I think this is a big one. And this is even with our own children. As they get older, and especially as they become teenagers and adults, things have a tendency to, especially if you have a lot of girls, and girls have different hormones and things every month that they're dealing with, things have a tendency to build and to explode if you're not careful. So I've learned some things along the way as a mom of many girls, and as a person who was married to a youth pastor for 10 years working with teenagers. I will say that I firmly believe that anyone that is in ministry working with teenagers and children needs to have kids of their own. I'm not saying that there's never a scenario where those people can't do that, help out in an area, or they can't be over a ministry, but it's very helpful if they've had children, if they've raised children, and especially if they've raised teens. I made a lot of mistakes when I was a young youth pastor's wife, and it all comes down to me never having raised teens as my own. Now that I've raised a few, I look back at some things that I handled the wrong way, and now I know I was in error. Now I know I did not handle that situation correctly. I could have done this a lot better. I shouldn't have acted. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have acted that way towards a teenager, because there's a difference in us having memories of being teenagers ourselves and then us actually raising teenagers. It's a whole big different scenario. So now that I've raised a few teenagers, I've in the midst of raising them, and I have raised them, I look back and I know that I messed up. When in some of my interactions with teens, as far as number one, you don't deal with things late at night. That's just a given. And I've learned that in my own marriage. You don't deal with things late at night. I don't ascribe to this whole don't let the sun go down upon your wrath, because obviously there's going to be times when it's just not going to be fixable at midnight. And so with my husband, he hates late night, like fights or discussions or whatever. So I've learned the problem will still be in there in the morning, but we can deal with it in the morning. When we both had a good night's sleep, when I've had my cup of coffee in the morning, things always look better in the morning. Things tend to look very dark and dismal at midnight when you're exhausted and maybe you've been dealing with kids all day. Just go to bed and get up in the morning and figure it out. And with teenagers, it's the same thing. Now, I will say sometimes you have to work through things late at night because teenagers tend to not be morning people and they would prefer to be up. But you as a mom, you know your limits. And when you sense that things are getting emotional because of being tired or, being overwhelmed, then you need to shut it down. Because as things intensify and as situations blow up, things are said in the heat of the moment that aren't necessarily true. They're not kind. They're not honest, because, you've built this situation up in your head and now it's all spilling out. And late night hours, they tend to bring out the worst in all of us. And so I do remember a couple situations where maybe at youth conferences and different things, there had been problems between some of the girls and some of the boys. Maybe someone was being picked on or whatever. And I just was determined to get to the root of it, and we were going to solve this. But things escalated because emotions are involved and exhaustion is involved. And it would have been better for me to just say, everyone go to bed, get a good night's sleep, and we'll fix the problem in the morning, because minds are sharper, emotions aren't as high, the tension isn't as high. And it's always good to kind of wait. If there's been a situation, it's always kind of good to just step back, let everyone cool down, and then revisit it, rather than visiting it as soon as it happens and anger is there, emotions are high. It's not good to deal with things in the heat of the moment. So I know for my husband and I, we've really tried, if there's a situation that's come up in church, in the ministry, with a parent, with another adult, we've really tried to just sit on it for a day or two before responding because we've learned this through the years and we're not always perfect. Sometimes we aren't. But even with my husband, when it comes to writing an email to someone, if he is upset at them or sending a text message or calling them, he will wait until he's not angry and then he will do it because that's what gets us in trouble oftentimes is our anger. And then the more people that know or the more public you make it, then pride gets involved. So for me, I've learned some things through my years of working with teenagers and raising teenagers. And as the adult in the situation, we need to recognize when emotions enter the discussion, the talk, the chat, life lessons with mom, but whatever it is, we're the adult in the situation, so we need to be the one that takes charge of the conversation as far as if emotions enter, you shut it down, and knowing when to shut it down, and knowing when you've pushed too hard, you need to pull back, when to show grace instead of condemnation, because as parents, we're so quick to just, point out every fault in our child. But the thing is, they're not adults yet. So there's going to be mistakes along the way, and we need to show a little grace for that. I'm 43 years old, raising, a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old. So I need to be willing to show grace at different situations. If they're tired, whatever. Stay calm. Don't yell. You shouldn't need to get your point across with yelling. You should be able to talk calmly. Oftentimes when you yell, the other person yells, and then you just both intensify in your anger and the yelling gets louder. You should both be able to remain calm. You and your husband, you and your teenager, you and your friend, whoever it is that you're having the disagreement with. Refrain from using the words, you never do this, I never feel this way, you never, say this, you never act this way, you never do this, because most of the times we don't always do something or never do something else. Sometimes we're, right on track for the most part, and we might slip up. So I would be really careful in using absolutes. This is impossible. We're never going to fix this. This is never going away. You never do this for me. It's probably not true, and it's a total exaggeration. So be very careful in using absolutes when you're having a disagreement with someone. And then obviously the goal should be restitution, whether that's in your marriage and you're having a disagreement, whether that's with your teenager, or whether that is with, a friend or a coworker. The goal should be restitution and just being able to get along. So I think one thing that we need to do when it comes to taking criticism from other people or having a disagreement is trying to realize where the other person is coming from. So in essence, putting yourselves in their shoes, right? Because every person has different baggage in their life. Every person has been through different scenarios, through different things. Our life shapes our opinions and our beliefs. So just use this for an example. I am a firm believer in life insurance. Why am I a firm believer in life insurance? My husband and I are both very healthy, never had any really severe health problems. We're in the prime of our life. Why would I be so picky about this? Because my dad died when I was 17. He was also very healthy until he was not. One of my best friends died of cancer at 40. She was healthy until she wasn't. And I know with my friend Kelly that died from cancer, there was no life insurance. There was no type of funds or anything. So I believe a GoFundMe was sent up. I don't even know. I think that was around back then. But in essence, her funeral was paid for by friends and family. And with my dad dying, I saw the struggles that my mom would have had she not had a huge life insurance policy that he had gotten through work. So because of that, we were set up very comfortably. My dad had determined that he wasn't going to take care of his wife and kids just while he was alive. He was also going to take care of them after his death, because it wasn't until he died that he was taking care of her. It was until she died that he was taking care of her. So because of this, he had a rather large life insurance policy. My mom didn't have to go back to work. She was able to keep homeschooling us. She owned the house free and clear, and so I see that, and because of that, my husband has always carried a life insurance policy on himself because it's the same way with him. He didn't just vow to take care of me while he was alive. It was until death do us part, as that includes me. So he wants to take care of me and the kids as long as I'm alive. So, but that's just one area where our life experience shapes our opinions and our beliefs. And that's one of my soapboxes that I tell people all the time, you need to have a life insurance policy. If you don't, it's super cheap. I mean, we pay $28 a month and might not ever use it, but what happens if we do need to use it, you know? Um, so all that being said, things that we've been through in our life have molded us into the person that we are. I'm going to have a different mindset when it comes to church and things of the church because I've been in ministry now for over 2 decades. And that's why, you know, you tend to click with people who go through the same things that you go through, whether that's being a ministry family, whether that's, you know, doctors tend to find other doctors and dentists tend to find other dentists. And, you know, it's just we kind of click with people that have the same background as us. So when you're handling conflicts with someone else, realize that they have different things. Maybe they were raised differently. You know, they were taught how to handle situations differently than you were. My mom kind of had the same approach that I do with my kids as far as conflict resolution, and that was I very rarely brought my mom into any tiff or dispute or anything I was having with friends. I very rarely, now the couple times that I did, it was when I believe authority figures had crossed the line and they had done personal attacks. And I brought my mom in for those situations and she handled it very well. And she went to bat for me. So I still think back on those times and I appreciate that she did that for me. So, but otherwise, and still it's like this in my marriage now. It's very rare that my husband there's no need for him to come in and get involved in any kind of disagreement or conflict that I might have going on with someone. It's very rare that he does. Now, he would if it came to people personally, like physically attacking me, obviously. But there have been people that have verbally gone after me, and I don't feel the need for him to take up for me or defend me. Obviously, for all of us, it feels good when someone else does. And that's why, even when it comes to different attacks throughout my life, I've learned it's best for me not to even try to defend myself because there's plenty of people who love me, who have my back, and it does kind of feel good when they, you know, defend you and stick up for you. But just remember that we all have different personalities, and God gave us all gifts, and yet He gave us all weaknesses too. So just because you're strong in one area, another person might not be strong in that area, and they might handle it differently than you did. So just having a little bit of compassion, having a little bit of social awareness when it comes to dealing with other people, and realizing that, you know, they weren't raised the same as us. They do things differently, whatever that may be. So also, when it comes to handling criticism or disagreements, I would say definitely handle conflicts early before offenses have time to build and build. Offenses have a way of becoming bigger in our minds the more that we think about them, and the more that we replay them, the more that we're in the shower thinking, I should have said this, and I would have said this if I had to do it over again, and I should have done this. You know, conflicts have a way of building and building and building. So try to deal with them early before they have a time to build into enormous problems. And believe me, that does help, or that does happen. I mean, speak truth in love. You can speak truth, but be kind. There is a difference. Now, I will say that being said, though, just because someone disagrees with you does not mean that they're being mean. Just because someone is being honest with you does not mean that they're being mean. And this just goes back to being easily offendable again. Don't be petty with other people and don't keep a list. I've seen some churches where the pastor like keeps lists on other people and keeps files on other people, and that's just weird to me because as Christians, where would we be if Jesus kept a running list of all of our offenses? But our offenses, especially after we confess them, even after salvation, are covered under the blood. So why, as Christians, being forgiven of such a huge running list of offenses, would we then keep lists of offenses against other people? And it kind of goes back to that story out of Matthew that I was talking about the servant that was forgiven much, and he went after someone who owed him very little. So we need to be really careful about that. It's really weird to keep lists of offenses against other people. Just don't be like that. It's not cool. Remember that you have faults as well. No one's perfect. We all have faults. We all have failings. We all have weaknesses. No one has it all together. So we need to keep that in mind when dealing with offenses that come in our life. If you constantly have issues with people, you might be the problem. Just take a hard look at yourselves. And I know this is all stuff I've said before, but it's all stuff we need to teach our kids too. Like, are you in the middle of every drama fest? You might be part of the drama. Are you in the middle of every argument? Are you in the middle of, think about it as moms. We know, think about our kids. Is there one kid that seems to be in the middle of every altercation? I've noticed that, and it's at different times. There will be one kid that just is in the middle. Like everything's peaceful until this one kid comes in, and then like war breaks out. Everything's peaceful, and then this kid walks in, and there's tears. Everything's peaceful, and then this kid walks in, and there's suddenly strife and contention going on. It can be that way in a church too. So if you are the one that's constantly in the middle of every fight, of every drama, take a good hard look and maybe step back and think, maybe I'm a little too offendable. Maybe I like drama too much. Maybe I like gossip too much, whatever it is. So if you are constantly having issues with people, though, you might be the problem. Realize that everyone doesn't need to be your best friend. And I also don't ascribe to this whole teaching of everyone needs to be close to everyone. I don't believe that because different people click with different people. And that doesn't mean that they have an issue with you or your personality. It just means that they might have different interests or different hobbies. I'm not going to get along with someone who is like a tree hugging, PETA supporting, vegan, I don't know, health nut. We're not going to have much in common. So my husband used to hunt. We believe that man has dominion over animals. I like meat. I like a good steak. So I'm not really going to get along with people like that. And it's silly to say that, to force a friendship, with someone that you just don't have much in common with. We all have different hobbies and things that we're going to be drawn to. We all have different situations. Like I said, oftentimes people with traumatic upbringings are drawn to other people with traumatic upbringings because they have a connection there. I am a pastor's wife, and some of my very best, closest friends are also pastors' wives, or they've been pastors' wives before. So there's just a connection there. We know what each other is going through. We know the struggles that we face. We know how it is. You don't know this stuff until you've been through it. So you're obviously going to click with different people over other people. Be kind to all and don't bully them, but it's silly to think that everyone will click with everyone. And I don't understand forcing friendships or trying to force friendships or anything like that. So, and then be the friend that you want to be. Try to be unoffendable, try to be kind, try to be gracious, try to be compassionate. When dealing with criticism, when giving criticism, or when taking criticism, I love this new favorite phrase of mine: unsolicited advice is always criticism. It's always criticism because if I didn't ask for opinion, why are you telling me that I should be doing something differently? You're just criticizing what I'm doing. So I like to think that when people give me unsolicited advice, because I do know unsolicited advice is criticism. So instead of being offended by it, I just think to myself, it doesn't matter. They're not really in a place I didn't ask for this advice. So I'm just going to let it go. That's what I do. Um, Stay in your lane when it comes to giving advice or giving criticism. Remember that there's different realms of like authority. Obviously, with my children, I'm allowed to criticize them or to offer constructive criticism, right? With my children, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. With other people's children, not so much. So I need to remember that someone else's child in the church is being raised differently than my children are, and that's not my lane. So it's not in my lane to criticize them, get after them, be like, "Oh my goodness, they're being like, what is wrong with them?" And we all have bad days. I know all of us moms at church have joked around, "What is in the air today?" But I think everyone's pretty good with just staying in their own lane as far as just dealing with their kids and ignoring the rest, right? So teach your kids to worry about themselves and not everyone else. And we try to do that with ours. Are they perfect? Absolutely not, but we're still raising them. We tell them often, okay, if they come tattling to us about someone, that's fine, but this they're this person's kid. They're not a McMurtry. Are they a McMurtry? Nope. Then don't worry about them. So you only get to worry about yourself. When criticism comes, and this is something we can teach our kids and for us personally, when criticism comes our way, look, see if there's any truth to what the criticism is, and then you can take it and deal with it then. So, there was just a situation where I told my daughter this exact thing, like, is this criticism warranted? And she said no. And I said, then you need to just let it go and you need not to take it personal because it's on them. Like if they are criticizing you for not doing something that they gave you no instruction about, no clear cut like direction, then that's not your fault and you don't need to worry about it. So, if you're doing your best as a Christian, as a daughter, if you're a mom, as a wife, let it roll off your back. If you know that you're in your heart, and I just said this yesterday to one of my kids, if you know in your heart that you are doing your absolute best, then that's really all you can do. And, sometimes you get on people's radar and they have an issue with you for whatever, and then every problem is magnified. And we have to be careful doing that to other people. There's not usually like a totally 100% bad person. We all have our good points and we all have our bad points. So when it comes to other people, we have to be really careful about like zoning in and targeting them and then only seeing bad. Whatever they do, it's bad. Whatever they say, it's bad. Whatever we hear about them, it's bad. We have to be really careful about that. Usually people have some good points to them. So, why don't we focus on the good points rather than zoning in on the bad points? Hey, Joyce. Hey, Amanda. I agree, Amanda. I do think sometimes it is projection on their part. So I tell my kids, if you're doing your best and someone criticizes you, even if it's unfair, you just got to let it go. You can't dwell on it. You can't think about it. You can't like let it alter your personality. If it's a personality trait that they don't like, well, we can't just change our personality, whether that's if we're outgoing or we're quiet or whatever that is. If there's room for improvement, yeah, take it with a grain of salt and improve. But if there's not, just let it go. I listened to this piece of advice. My husband said this years ago, and we both try to live by this. Don't listen or take to heart what your biggest flatterers say or your worst critics, because you're going to have both in your life. There's going to be people that think you can do no wrong and you hung the sun and you hung the moon until you didn't, and then they usually turn on you. That's a whole subject in and of itself, but usually flatterers are doing things or saying things as a way to get something out of you. They want to control you. They have an agenda, whatever. So, hi, Maria. A lot of new people in chat this week. So, usually people have an agenda when they're a big flatterer. So don't take to heart, don't even get a big head from something your biggest flatterer says, but then also don't let the words of your worst critic get to you as well, because you're going to have both. You kind of need to have people with balance in your life. You need to have balance who will support you in your good points, but then kind of reel you back if you're doing something that maybe is not so great. And that's where friends and family come in. So if someone will not instruct you correctly and you get it wrong, it's on them, not you. And this comes down to like your boss, coworkers, anyone in a position of authority. If they're just throwing you out to the wolves and you're expected to know how to do it without any instruction, it's not on you, it's on them at that point. Ask for clarification when it comes to, because I don't know about you, but for me personally, I like getting things right and I like doing a good job. So if I don't feel like I have clear instruction, I like clearing that up. Can you please explain this to me? What exactly do you want? Do you have a checklist of things you want me to do? What do you want from me? And I've done that before in situations where I've had a secular job. I've asked them. I like clear instruction. I like knowing the protocol, what they expect from me. And then I try to go above and beyond that. So realize unfair criticism will come at times. Just learn when to let it go or learn when to do something about it. There is a time and a place to address unfair criticism. There is a time and a place to go to authority in your life and say, listen, I think this was uncalled for. I think I was not deserving of this. Can we please clear this up? And it's, sometimes it's good to address it. Sometimes it'll put you on their radar more. And then you've got fallout from that. And now they're thinking that you're just like offended over everything. So you really have to weigh the two things. Do I do something about this or do I let it go? Oftentimes it's just best to let things go because they have a potential to build and to explode. But, only you can decide that. So when it comes to disagreements, maybe it's your kid and another kid with disagreements. Maybe it's you and your child with a disagreement. Maybe it's you and your husband with a disagreement. Teach your kid to remain calm. And this is really hard when kids are little because they get all flustered and they let the emotion take over. So I try to really teach my kids that when going into a situation, you need to remain calm. When emotion enters and when tears enter, it's going to be really hard to tone it down, to calm things down. So I try to teach my kids to remain calm because when emotion enters the discussion, it's going to be hard to say anything constructive. People might need to walk away at that time. There have been times even when I feel myself becoming very heated with my husband, and I know that I'm going to say some things I'm going to regret. So I will tell him I need space. If it's late at night, I will go to sleep because you can't deal with things at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm a firm believer in going to sleep and working it out in the morning. When it comes to my own kids, midnight is not the time to do these things. And so sometimes it's good to just say, we will revisit this in the morning. I'm not shutting you down right now. I am in the way that we'll come back to this. But right now, it's best for all of us to just get a good night's sleep, and then we'll revisit this in the morning because the disagreement's still going to be there. And you're all going to be a lot more sane in the morning. I've taught my kids to work out their own issues. So maybe this is being in the ministry and seeing people not being able to work out their own problems, but every home does it differently. And that's fine. And so my kids might be thrown for a loop when someone does get a parent, runs off and gets a parent involved or runs off and gets whoever involved, because I've tried to teach them, you need to directly go to the person of the situation. First of all, you don't talk to other people about it. Second of all, you go directly to that person if you have a problem, because if you have a problem big enough to tell other people about, it's a problem big enough to go to their face about. So I've tried to teach them to go to that person and talk directly to them, but not everyone's going to do it that way. Some people might want to get others involved and they'll do it differently. So then you got to work with that. But, Disagreement should be rare. Having different opinions is okay. It's totally okay. And just because you disagree with someone on something does not mean that it's a personal attack. My best friends and I disagree on things. I have a couple best friends and we disagree on things often and we just say, I don't agree with that, and we leave it at that. And it would be weird if like all of my best friends were like, oh my goodness, Cassandra, yes, you are so right about like every little thing. That's not even a friendship at that point. It's just an echo chamber. So both my husband and I are big on not living in echo chambers. So we like to surround ourselves with people that have differing views than us in the IFB. And the IFB has a broad range of beliefs. That's why we're independent. There's no pope that's like declaring you have to follow this doctrine, you have to do things this way. So it's very broad. The term IFB is very broad and it covers a lot of different things because IFB can be different on eschatology and secondary issues, whereas we pretty much have the fundamentals all the same, right? Like salvation by grace through faith, once saved, always saved. Most IFB is King James only. We're all for soul winning. And so we have like the main things, but then there's little differing secondary issues, which is not a big deal. Some people, though, they believe that disagreement is an attack, and that's just silly. Let's not raise our children that way. And if we take every disagreement as an attack, we're going to raise kids who also take every disagreement as an attack as an adult, and that's just not realistic. Adults should be disagreeing with each other on certain things because we're not all robotic. We all have different wills and we all have different minds. We've all been raised differently. We all have different unique situations in our past that have made us into the people that we are. So it's not realistic to think that everyone's just going to think exactly the same on every single issue. So big disagreements should be rare and there shouldn't be big blow-ups all the time. Having different opinions is okay on things. Letting them turn into battles is not. It's not okay. Learn how to disagree with others without resorting to personal attacks. I know this is one thing that my husband has really tried to do on his show because we want to model this for our kids as well. We try to address the actual topic at hand and not go after a person for personality flaws, character trait flaws, anything that we think, is a character flaw or whatever, but rather we go after the topic. And it can be that with our children too, we have to be careful doing this because we know our children better than anyone. We know if we have one that tends to be lazy. We know if we have one that tends to have a temper. We know if we have one, whatever. And so when having a disagreement with them, we need to be careful in resorting to personal attacks because they're going to remember those words. I don't care what you say, words hurt. And there's so many verses in the Bible about words. So we need to be careful that we don't cross the line into belittling or bullying or making references to character flaws. More so just dealing with the issue at the hand, which for a teenager, it could be, I disagree on, I disagree with you acting this way. I disagree with you listening to this type of music. I disagree with, the length of your skirt or whatever. That's not even really anything that goes on in my home. I'm just throwing examples out of there. I'm just throwing examples out there. Be careful when addressing the length of a skirt. Then you're talking about how your daughter didn't take the trash out the other day. That has nothing to do with the topic at hand. So we have to be careful with keeping the topic at hand. Teach them to confront people directly. Don't tell everyone else without talking to them. Teach your kids to calmly and rationally discuss your differences without getting upset, angry, blowing up, et cetera, et cetera. Teach them that it's good to have disagreements and it's healthy to have differences in opinions. I've never been one that thought my kids could never see a disagreement between me and their dad because I think that they need to see conflict resolution as well. And at the end of the day, my kids know that my husband and I are always going to work things out. The divorce word is never said in our home. We're always going to work through issues or problems that come up, and then they're able to observe us doing that. So teach your kids that conflicts and disputes will come up. whether it's their marriage, whether it's at work, whether it's in the church, and they just need to learn how to work through it without going into bullying, without going into personal attacks, while doing it very calmly, rationally, and, not late at night. I can't stress that enough. Teach them that honesty is not being mean, and that someone who is honest with them is not being mean, but rather there are verses where it talks about iron sharpeneth iron, about how faithful are the wounds of a friend. There are verses all through the Bible talking about how a good friend will basically be honest with you and tell you how it is. So being honest is not being mean. Another good advice I give to my kids is don't text it, say it in person, because I've seen way too many things, and I've messed up in this area and I've learned from it. If there's ever a difficult conversation that needs to be had, I will do it in person or over the phone through voice. I will not text it. Number one, there are people out there who try to use text against me, only showing one text at a time and then putting their spin on it and accusing me of things that never happened. Whether that's like different things I teach women when it comes to marriage and, being there for their husband physically. They'll take things and then they'll twist it into I'm blaming them for all their marriage problems, which has never happened. That doesn't even sound like me. So I don't ever text anything anymore controversial. Anything that's going to be a deep discussion or a heavy discussion, I only do through the phone, like calling. Can I call you? I need to talk about this with you. I don't ever text it because people can take texts and do crazy things with them. So that's one thing I've learned through ministry and through just ministry with technology, I guess, is that the written word tends to be misused. It tends to be misrepresented, different things like that. So deal with problems quietly and disagreements privately, because once it becomes public, pride enters. And that's where another risky thing in doing YouTube comments or Facebook comments is then other people, anyone can see it, and then pride enters and people don't often back down after pride enters the picture. So teach your kids to be very careful with burning bridges when it comes to disagreements in relationships, because once you burn the bridge, there's not usually any coming back from that. And once someone is offended, it's very hard. What is that? A brother offended is harder. I can't remember the exact saying that. I got to look that up because that's a really good verse. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. So you have to be really careful when dealing with people and burning bridges, because normally there's no coming back from that, especially when pride enters the picture and when things are very public. You are responsible for your reactions, not other people's. And I just told this to a daughter yesterday. I said, you cannot control other people or how they treat you. You can't control what other people say to you, but you are responsible for your reaction to it. And now you have a choice. You can either take what they said to you, you can become bitter about it, you can think about it all the time, you can obsess about it all the time, you can let it alter your personality in a bad way, or you can take what they said and you can let it go, and you can just be the best that you know you can be. You can keep serving the Lord, you can keep loving the Lord, you can keep loving your family, you can keep loving your church, and you can be the better person. So we cannot control other people. We cannot control the way they treat us. We cannot control what they say to us, but we can control our reactions to it. So that is one thing I'm trying to drill through my kids' heads. When dealing with other people and disagreements come up and criticism comes up, remember that words do hurt. So when you are dealing with other people, be careful in resorting to personal attacks. Like I said, remember that your words do carry weight and that words do hurt, and people have a tendency to replay words over and over and over in their mind. Remember when dealing with other people that you are talking with someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's friend. And that a lot of times, especially with kids or teenagers, their parent has invested a lot of their whole life. They've poured their whole life into them. They've invested a lot of time. They've invested a lot of love. They've invested a lot of finances. They've invested their entire life into raising this child. Take that into consideration. If you are in a leadership position, such as, you are a youth leader, you're a pastor's wife, and you're overseeing some activities at the church, be very gentle in how you handle other people's children. More importantly, you're talking with someone who Jesus loves. Jesus loves that child. Jesus loves that teenager. And I often feel as if, and this is coming from a place where I was a youth pastor's wife for 10 years, so I can say this because I did it. I often feel like sometimes youth pastors can be the harshest on teens, and I almost feel like they hate teenagers or they hate kids. And that's really weird to me because I actually am the opposite. I love kids and I love teenagers because, especially kids, because they're honest. You know where you stand with a kid. And for the most part, teenagers are honest too, unless they've just been shut down so many times in their life, they're afraid of ever being open and honest with people. But I tend to love kids and teenagers, and I don't understand why anyone would be in that line of work and hate them. But sometimes it does seem like they broad brush. All teenagers are bad. All teenagers are this way. All teenagers have a problem with authority. No, there's a lot of good teenagers out there, and there's a lot of good kids that are trying to serve the Lord. So if we have a more positive outlook of teenagers, it will definitely help, because having a positive outlook will help frame our mind when it comes to teenagers and kids and even other adults if we have a positive outlook on them. Learn to not take everything personally. Maybe that person was having a bad day. Maybe the words didn't come out right. I remember there was at our old church, my father-in-law used to do this thing where he would do a picture of someone as a baby or a kid, and you were supposed to guess who it was. And there was this one, it was like a picture of a girl with a horse. And this guy came up when we found out who it was. I remember I was standing there and I heard him, and he went up to her and he's like, "I don't know who's better looking, you or the horse." And that was he was trying to compliment, but it came off really wrong. Or I can't remember who it was that even said it. It might have been a woman that said it to the girl who was in the picture of the horse. But I just remember thinking, okay, that did not come out right for that person, because that's kind of an insult, like saying that an animal is better looking than you, but it just came out the wrong way. And, in that situation, I think the person just laughed about it. But it's obvious in that situation, the person just had a gaffe moment, right? They just put their foot in their mouth and it just came out the wrong way. I don't think they were saying that you're uglier than an animal. It was a pretty horse and it was a pretty girl or something that was with the horse. So they just tried to give a compliment, but it came out the wrong way. So we have to be careful not taking everything so personal, because people slip up in their words all the time. Things come out the wrong way. Things are said that just come out the wrong way. So we have to be really careful not taking everything personally. And then the biggest thing to teach our kids is, when you've been wronged or when you've been hurt, don't keep a list of offenses against other people. You have to let things go. You can't talk about the time 10 years ago when, Aunt Mabel said that your casserole wasn't that good. You can't just let that control your life and control, okay, I'm never going to make another casserole again because Aunt Mabel said that my casserole wasn't good. So I'm just terrible at casseroles. Maybe you forgot an important ingredient that day. Just keep trying. Just make the casserole. There's been a lot of horrible things that have been said about me in my life, and maybe that's why I have thicker skin than most. But I just get to a point where I've got best friends, and I've got a husband who loves me, and I've got kids who loves me, and I've got a church who loves me. And the people who know me as Cassandra, they know if something's being said that's not true or is a lie. And I have people who would defend me and people who would take up for me. And for me, that's enough. I don't need to be out there defending myself against every wrong. And I don't want my kids getting it in their head that everyone's out to get them. Everything said is personal against them. So we have to be really careful as adults when dealing with people who hurt us that number one, we don't become bitter, we don't become obsessed, we don't make it our life's mission to destroy the person that hurt us, but rather we leave it in God's hands. And if there is any chance of reconciliation, we try to reconcile those things. We try to talk privately with a person because once you start publicly talking, that's when things get really messy when pride enters the picture. So, as parents, we really have to be careful about exemplifying a life where we act like Christians and we can talk a big game, but when it comes down to where the rubber meets the road, um, we have to show our kids how it's done. We have to show them how to live this Christian life. We have to show them how to forgive others. We have to show them how not to be offended by everything. We have to show them how not to take things personally. So, and Krista, you are absolutely correct. Those words do stick with you. I mean, I remember that story. I wasn't even in the picture with the horse, but I still remember that story. I remember when I was a kid, this was kind of a turning point for me. And I've told this story before, but I remember when I was on bus to teen camp, and I've always had a big nose. See my big nose? It's the Cutler nose. I proudly own it now. But as a teenager, someone was laughing and they were like, "She looks like Fraggle Rock," talking about me. I look like Fraggle Rock. I don't know if you remember Fraggle Rock, but Fraggle Rock was, okay, I have to show you Fraggle Rock now. You could just Google it, but it's more fun to show. So Fraggle Rock was back in the, I don't know, like 80s or something. So let me show you Fraggle Rock. And they were like, "She looks like Fraggle Rock," like talking about me. And instead of just like getting all offended, this is Fraggle Rock. This is Fraggle Rock right here. So instead of getting all offended, I don't know if it's like this one, maybe, because that's like doesn't even have a nose. It's like all a beak, right? Instead of getting offended, I learned that I had to just laugh with it. And so acknowledge it. When people try to criticize you, well, first of all, I did laugh and I'm like, you know what? You're right. I kind of do a little bit, don't I? And then that takes away the power from whoever was trying to say it in a hurtful way. And, they were picking on me. They were trying to make fun of me. But it takes away the power when you agree with them and you laugh along with them. So it was around that time, though. I was 15, 16 around that time. I decided, God made me exactly the way He made me. He made me with curly hair. God made me with big nose. He made me with brown eyes. He made me with brown hair. And He made me exactly the way He wanted me to be. And it's futile and it's fruitless to try to wish things away. And one of the stories that had the biggest impact on me as a young girl was Amy Carmichael, where she talks about how she prayed every night, "Lord, please give me blue eyes. Please give me blue eyes." She had brown eyes. And every morning she was so disappointed when she would wake up and she would still have brown eyes. Well, she ended up being a missionary to India, I believe it was. And she started going into temples to rescue, I believe it was little slave girls or something. I'm not quite getting the story right. You'll have to look up her story. It's fascinating. Anyway, she would disguise herself. She would put on to make herself look Indian. And it was at that point that she realized if she would have been born with blue eyes, or if God would have answered her prayer and miraculously changed her brown eyes to blue, she would never have gotten away with going undercover because her blue eyes would have given her away as not being Indian or whatever nationality it was that she was trying to rescue those girls from. So that always made an impression on me. And God made us who we are. And so with my kids, I've tried really hard to get across to them, you don't pick on other people for the way they look, things that they can't change. God made them exactly the way that He wants them. But that being said, I still remember that from the time that I was, 15, 16. I still remember them saying things. And even having a public platform, people have tried to, I've been called Miss Piggy. I have been, I don't know, called other things, lots of other things having a public platform. But at the end of the day, you got to let those things roll off and not obsess about them. While I still remember them, I'm not like laying in bed every night like, "Oh my goodness, I remember when that kid called me Fraggle Rock. Oh my goodness, remember when that YouTuber called me Miss Piggy." I can laugh about it. We need to learn to laugh about things like this, okay? We need to learn to laugh about it. Laugh at ourselves. Yeah, agree with, yeah, I've got a big nose. Yeah, I've got this. Yeah, I've got frizzy hair, whatever it is. Yeah, I'm overweight. So we just need to not take ourselves so seriously and not get offended by every little thing and not let it dictate our lives. And we are the best ones for showing our kids that. So we are the best. We are the best one. Yeah, definitely look up the story of Amy Carmichael. I loved that story. There was actually a book I used to have. I wish I still had it. I can't remember what it was called, but I loved that book because I was obsessed when I was younger with missionaries. I still love missionaries. And I was obsessed. And I felt from the time that I was 4 or 5, shortly after being saved, so I would say 5 or 6, yes, Amanda, you are my buddy that has the baseball bat swinging behind me as I tell you a story, and you're like, I'm off to war. That's Amanda. She's my warrior princess friend. Um, but yeah, I had a book that I used to read, and from the time I was 5 or 6, I loved missionaries. To I wanted to serve God in full-time ministry. So he's literally given me the desires of my heart. Being married to a pastor now for 23 years, I am living the dream that I wanted as a 6-year-old girl. So I was obsessed with missionaries and missionary stories. I've read all the missionary stories. And that book that I had with Amy Carmichael was one of my favorites. I loved it. So I'm going to try to find it and link to it if I can, or just find a book about Amy Carmichael. That would be a good recommendation for you to read to your kiddies. But that is all I have for today. Thank you for joining. And let me make sure I didn't miss. Oh, I'm sorry, Kaylin. Curly hair can be a pain. It definitely can, but it can also be easy. I mean, literally, I diffused my hair yesterday. I only used gel. I've not used a curling iron on any of it. Rolled out of bed this morning. I always put it up in a bun when I go to sleep. Shook out my hair, put a bobby pin in, and was done. So it can be pretty easy too, for the most part, if you know how to take care of it. So, but yeah, God made us all unique, and I hope you all have a great week. Next week, I will be going to the airport to drop off friends, so I might move the time to next Monday night. Not quite sure how that will go because we're dropping off our friends to fly back to Ireland. So I hope you all have a great week and a great summer. It is wrapping up for me, but I'm ready to get back to routine. So we will see you all next week.